So yes, as Richard says, I am a lecturer in public history, and public history broadly refers to all the ways in which the past manifests in our lives, be that in museums and archives, in commemorative events, political rhetoric, on screen, in the media, and in the spaces and places where we live. And my work as a public historian involves collaborating with community partners and individuals to make histories in public, so through things like exhibitions, research projects and events. And it also involves research to understand the political, social, cultural, and emotional effects of that work. My main interest, as has been mentioned, is in the co-production of historical knowledge by people with different perspectives and backgrounds, and to think about how that can support present-day needs and also help us to work towards better futures. And today I want to talk briefly about two previous projects and then very quickly show a slide with 3 dreams for new collaborations. So over the past few years, I've worked quite closely with York Past and Present, which is a Facebook group of almost 40,000 members worldwide who share stories, archives and images of the city. Our project, pictured here, Hungate Histories, explored the archives of early 20th century Hungate to produce blog posts and an exhibition that reflected on its past as a slum in the context of the executive redevelopment of the Hungate area in the 2010s. And the project constructed new narratives about the place by exploring records that were dispassionately created by local government through the eyes of local people who felt a social and emotional connection to past residents. We went on to explore how that historical knowledge that we generated might be used to empower local communities to create a vision for more sustainable and accessible housing in the city, which was a critical concern of many of the people involved in the project. It was an intervention that draws on what archival theorist Michelle Caswell calls the archival imaginary, in which historical knowledge can level the playing field, helping people to communicate with organisations and decision makers where there may be a power imbalance on a more equitable basis. So Hungate Histories allowed local people in York to talk authoritatively to, for example, the York City Council. The future orientation of the research demonstrates the potential of public history for opening up debates on critical issues in the present. Exploring how historical perspectives can challenge rather than reinforce social inequalities and marginalisations was also at the heart of the Mirror project. The acronym here stands for Memory, Identity, Rights in Records and Access. And the project explored the memory and identity needs of adults who were in care as children. It was participatory and co-produced with care experienced people for whom archives may be the only source of information about events in their early lives. And the aim of the project was to produce a history of child social care in England and Wales from 1948 to the present, which could then be used to support care leavers to find and access records of their own pasts, and could also inform the working practices of social workers who are creating the records of the future and archivists who are looking after the legacy of historical files. The impact of the research was really far-reaching and contributed to a global debate in social work and social policy about the rights of care experienced people to memory and identity. And during this project, I collaborated with archivists, records professionals, social workers, voluntary organisations and professional bodies like the British Association of Social Workers across the UK to produce advice and guidance on managing social care records in human-centred and socially just ways. For me, this kind of work underlines the value and critical importance of co-production in history, especially when working with personal histories and with sensitive topics and marginalised communities. This photograph is from our end of project research symposium, at which 11 care experienced co-researchers presented alongside academics and others with lived experience of care from Australia, New Zealand and Canada. This was just pre-pandemic, thankfully. And it was a culmination of what was a really powerful and emotional experience for them and me. So this work that I've done thus far has given me a real appetite for this kind of collaboration, particularly participatory and co-productive research. And in terms of future plans, these are 3 things that are currently on my radar. Very, very briefly, there's a project around urban wealth and elites in the north of England, which is potentially a joint project with the University of Sheffield, considering how how places and communities have been shaped by the priorities, interests and aspiration of the wealthy and powerful since 1800, this being a way in which we can potentially leverage action for those who may have been oppressed or had less power and influence in these contexts. And there's a lot of potential for collaboration there with museums and civic organisations and charities. Secondly, there is a project around rural museums and community regeneration. I'm particularly interested in how we can create sustainable participatory community practices in rural areas where urban models may not work quite so well. Again, lots of potential collaboration there. And then this final one may seem a bit out of place amongst the others, but this project arises out of the Mirror research, and it's a participatory action research project looking at the ways in which child sexual abuse has been remembered and recorded in Britain, working with victims and survivors as co-researchers. And that's a project that's very close to my heart. So I've spoken here today primarily in a personal capacity, but as Richard mentioned, I am also the Director of IPUP, the Institute for the Public Understanding of the Past, and within the History Department that exists to coordinate and support public history collaborations and partnerships. So I'd like to invite anyone who'd like to collaborate on history projects, whether the ones that I've mentioned or others, to contact me for a conversation. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Victoria. And contact